Sorry. So first off, I'd like to thank the Hero Wendake community for having us in this exceptional location on their territory and for giving us such a fine example of culture-led development. We're thrilled to start the project here in such a big venue. So thank you so much for having us. I have a couple housekeeping matters to start off with. The first is, could you just quickly identify your meal choice for lunch on that long skinny card? And if you don't mind, we'd like to do a photo right at the end of this session, and we'd like to have your permission to use the photograph. So we're asking if you could sign this waiver form for the photo as well. We also kindly ask, because we have translation, Spanish translation, if you could speak in English and reasonably clearly so that we can make the translation work. And finally, the washrooms are over there on the left. So that's it for me, and I would very much like to welcome Open Fair, local elder, Holy Mother. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for the decision to come to our territory. It's an honor for us to have people from all over the world come not only to the hotel, but to the whole community. I'd first like to thank our creator for giving us our help to be here today, so that we could all join and get to know each other. And I'd like to thank Mother Earth. Without her, we wouldn't be here. Mother Earth takes care of our lakes, our forests, our rivers, the fish, all the animals that we need for us to survive. And I'd like to ask for directions. Since the east gives us our light, the south will give us the warm weather, the rain will come from the west, and from the north we have the winds. These are the four elements that Mother Earth uses to grow everything and feed us. And in the way of First Nations people, I'd like to say that any decision you will be taking by the end of your meetings, to us it will be decisions for the next 7 generations. All I have left to say is have a nice day, have a nice week here with us, and anything you need, we're here to help you.
Welcome. Hi. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Is it on? bien.
vous voulez dire en bien?
Comment ça marche
Ok, la liste, parce que c'est pas mon
Oui,
système.
non,
C'est
non.
pas mon système.
Je crois que ça marche pas. On les avait testés hier. Sorry, Nash, my question. Yeah, don't yes. Yes.
Okay.
It works.
Essaie de ça va être là. Bon, parce que le deuxième, c'est le senti. Est-ce qu'ils sont venus? Allô? Allô?
But they are now in also get here, so I think they will be change the
¿Está ese botón? Ok. ¿Para escuchar? Para escuchar en español.
French.
Oh, we had other ones. Yeah.
So, if I may say something, for interpretation purposes, English is 1, Spanish is 2. There's no French, unfortunately, because there's only one group. So, if you have to speak, please speak slowly because we don't see anything. You cannot see a screen. And please speak at the microphone, otherwise we can't hear you. If we can't hear you, you should not translate.
All right. Well, thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone around this circle. First, I'd like to thank also our elder for to make this prayer that is really needed every time we meet. It brings the good spirits around this circle, and it makes sure that the fire is right in the middle, is started, and we will keep the fire growing as the day goes by with our good minds and our good hearts and our good thinking, so that when we will leave this conference, this place, we will be sure that we have done what is needed to be done, which is to work for the next 7 generations ahead. So, yeah, I was glad to see my friend here, Madame. She's related to a good friend of mine that I've been working with for many, many years. Pat Madame, a good leader, good chief, a grand chief also. Glad to see also the Sami representative. I was reminding him of the great experiences I had in the past working with very powerful Sami leaders, including Madame Rothschild, that he doesn't remember, but he's going to find out because she was so powerful, she was so brilliant, and I also told my friend from the Sami that she put her life at stake, you know, for to fight for human rights. We were sent out by our own organization organizations, to countries in the world that needed to have us to inquire about human rights conditions. So we found ourselves in Peru, in Colombia, in Guatemala, with Rigoberta Menchú. We found ourselves in Managua, which is the capital of Nicaragua, Honduras, and very, very lucky enough to have come back alive from these very, very tough human rights fact-finding missions. And when we were in Guatemala, for example, there's been a coup d'etat, and 3 months ago we were in Geneva at the United Nations level, and we were, very, very highly condemning the way the Guatemalan government was treating the First Nations over there. And then with the coup d'etat, we were trapped in with Rigoberta Menchú, a hero of our time, a Nobel Peace Prize. So, yeah, when I find myself around this circle, all kinds of souvenirs come back. And here we are in Canada, trying to address economic development from a comprehensive perspective. And we know that there is no economic development without the development of human resources. So if you have a chance, go and see. You should. I encourage you. I could do anything for you to go and visit that. It's the biggest training center in Canada. It's in French because Quebec City is for the French and Montreal is for the English. So all of the First Nations that speak French as a second language they come to Quebec. And the ones who speak English, they go to Montreal. And we cannot afford to have the training center in 2 languages. So you talk about Innu, Anishinaabe, Mi'kmaq, Atikamekw nations. Huron won that for sure, and some Wabanaki. And you'll enter into what is exactly the situation, not the one that we want it to be, but the one that exists. You find 250 young people, all dropouts. You'll find a woman, a mother, she's 22, should be 23 soon. She has 2 babies, she's alone. She has a secondary 1.5. She hasn't finished secondary 2. And what's going to happen? We cannot hire her because she didn't have the credentials. What is she going to find a job? Racism exists, discrimination exists, indifference exists also, and so we need to have ourselves. It has to come from ourselves. We learned from day one that we cannot rely on nobody else than ourselves. That's why this circle is so important. That's why we need to advance with an agenda that brings these issues forward. The alliance is growing every day. You see, 30 years ago, if you recall, years ago, we didn't have this, these group of people, very top quality people, being part of our alliance. And thanks for to be part of the alliance. Every day, we need to polish the chain of alliance. Never let it rust, because when it's rusted, it's very, very tough to clean. Very tough, and you lose time. Always try to clean what you should have been doing every day. Just polish it. Taking care of the alliance. We're all important. We're all working for the same task and the same goal. We want to improve the life of our people. We want to train them. We want to give them opportunities to fight suicide, to fight abuses of all kinds, because we are humanists, all of us, first of all. We care for humans. We care for the people, disregarding which color it might be. It has nothing to do with it. We belong to the same planet, to the same person. If I don't have no more moose to eat, I'm done, I'm done. You will not have moose also. So don't kill all the moose. Leave some for the kids, the next generations to come. So we're together. They don't belong to me, and they don't belong to you. They belong to us. And so the we becomes a very important way how to address things. We're in it together. Last thing is, and you might have the best constitution in the world. We've seen that in the past. Countries developing a constitution. When you look at their constitution, you say, "Well, look at that." Never seen a constitution of the land that puts First Nations so high. We recognize the rights of the First Nations. We recognize their lands, their languages. We recognize their culture. Well, you say, wow. But is it true? Is it true? Are they only words, or just a track? So we need to find that concretely in the world, in the day-to-day, we need to find that it exists, that it is true. Talking about resources, natural resources. Let's take the Canadian example. Canada. We're supposed to be celebrating this year 150 year of the Constitution of Canada. Well, let me tell you, I haven't seen or heard any First Nation citizens from one end of the country to the other saying that they're going to be celebrating that. Why should we be celebrating a constitution that evacuates completely First Nations? A constitution that doesn't speak a word, not a word, a word. Just a little word about us. It's a constitution that was made for the French and the English. Completely. So we're not in it. And we should be carrying the flag and applauding this constitution that left us out. Absolutely not. What we're celebrating? We're celebrating Canada. Canada is our country. Canada has always been our country. This is our land. The Constitution of Canada, nothing to celebrate. Absolutely nothing. The French and the English divided the country for themselves and by themselves. And it is what it is today. So talking about economic development without talking about access to the resource, without making sure that Quebec or Ontario or BC or whatever province is going to accept that we're going to share a piece of the pie. we are a very powerful negotiator. We have to negotiate everything. Nothing is offered to us. We have to fight for everything that we can put in the plate of our children. We have to fight. Nothing free for us. Nothing free. This country doesn't belong to us according to the Canadian Constitution. We're supposed to be in our reserves, under an apartheid regime, and wait for a welfare check while our children are desperate and are waiting for not much. So we're here to fight against also all of this propaganda of victimization. It's a trap. It's a trap. People, let's not get into the trap of the victimization stuff. Once we decide that we become a victim, we're a victim. We're handicapped. We're handicapped. We put the coat and the chair, and we're done. We're a victim of the system. So let's not fall into that trap, because this is the only answer that Canada gave us following the Royal Commission report. The healing process. Yeah, we heal, okay? But then we're okay, we're strong, and we stand on our feet and we're going to fight because we're warriors. We're not going to be handicapped for the rest of our life. And we don't want to be seen as a bunch of victims and handicapped. We respect the people who are in fact handicapped. We respect them so much. But the answer that Canada sent to us, that we're all a bunch of victims, it is wrong. It is wrong. This nation here is, every day what I'm saying to our people, this nation is powerful, strong, set, able to achieve whatever we want, as long as we're united and as long as we respect each other. And nothing, we don't fear anything. We're acting as a nation. We take our tradition from our people. We nationalize everything here. This belongs to the nation, this place. Everything here. When you will travel to Wendake, you will find that everything belongs to everybody. We're proud of this infrastructure. They belong to us. So we have we relate, and this way it's a lot easier to find common denominators. When it's time to fight for our right to out in the country, we're together, and we really fight. And because we're not fighting because we want to fight. We're fighting for sometimes to say to the provincial government that this resource belongs to us also, because they would want us to always be the last. So I just hope that with these few words, you captured a bit, from who we are, where we want to go, and what we are expecting from your initiative. And I want to commend you all. You don't know, I'm pretty sure you don't know how important it is what you're doing. It's very, very, very important. And I consider you all as brothers and sisters. And continue to feed the fire today. And the rest of the days you're going to be here. Feel at home. This is your home. This is the Hotel of First Nations. Be part of the alliance. And this way we're going to succeed together. So,
thank you so much for those comments and for pressing us to think very broadly about these issues. And we're really grateful to be to hear your remarks and to be here. I'd like to say welcome now, Don Leach. to give us some remarks as our Indigenous champion for this project. And I'm sorry to say do this, but as a timekeeper, if you could keep your remarks as short as possible. Thank you.
Ani bonjour. Idaran Nishnakas. Jijak Dodem. Nidom Dojaba. I know that's not Spanish, it's not English. It's my home language, and I'm letting the creator know where I am. My name is Dawn Madavi Leach. I'm from Northern Ontario in central Canada, and I'm honored to be here in the traditional territories of the Wendake people. I had the pleasure this morning to meet Elder One, and one of the things that I learned about him is how entrepreneurial he is. He's been a businessman all his life. And I think that that is so fitting from this community that has such a powerful reputation across Canada and probably the world as a very entrepreneurial community. The people here have worked hard, and you can see still practicing our traditional practices in the hunting and trapping that our people have always done. It's evident in this facility that we're in today. But this is a very progressive community, but it's also been progressive in having the language brought back. I know it's part of the schools here, their curriculum, and that's how it has been in many of our First Nation communities across the country, where our language was on the verge of being lost. But we've taken this concern into our own hands in many ways to revitalize that language. And I know in my own area we have immersion schools now that have come about, where our children are learning right all through school to speak the language, but they're still learning math and science and everything like that, but in our language. And I'm so honored to be sitting beside my friend here, the Grand Chief Conrad Siwi, who I heard speak many, many years ago at the national level, and I know him to be a very passionate, intelligent individual who, when I say intelligent, he's an intellectual, well-read, and very knowledgeable, as you can see, of world issues. So it's just an honor to be sitting here beside him. I want to welcome the people from the different parts of the world as well to Canada and these lands. We're very, very honored that you've traveled all this way to be here to visit us. And as we sit in this circle, I'm looking forward to this circle growing larger. One of the things that we're talking here about is regional development and how to better engage and find leading practices for including Indigenous people in the development around the world. What an amazing project to work on. This is something that the world has needed for a long, long, long time. And I'm really happy that we have an opportunity here to say and to give our best advice and our direction on the best way to do this with Indigenous people. I really am looking forward to that, because when I think of the circle that we're in now, the circle is a very powerful tool, or not a tool, part of our Indigenous people around the world. We talk about the circle, our ceremonies are in the circle. Everything that we talk about is talks about inclusiveness in the circle, and that's what a circle is. If you all take a moment to stand, I would like to ask you to stand in this circle. And I'd like to ask you to turn away outside the circle, face with your back to the circle. When you do this, I know the headpieces are needing to change. It's a different it's a different feeling when you're outside the circle and you're facing outside and you're not, I'm sure the way you're feeling right now is that you're not part of it, that you're isolated and that you're alone. But when you turn back into the circle again, you could see the people and that you're part of something. And this is what it's like for Indigenous people to be part of what is going on in our regions, in our countries, our territories, is to be part of this circle. We're so fortunate that people have been taking the steps to be part of the circle. And it's so important to all of us in the world. And I can tell you that when Indigenous communities succeed and do well, a whole area succeeds, the whole region succeeds. It's all about being part of that. And I think it's so important for all of us to remember that inclusiveness is so key to anything that we do. It's enriching. You feel good, you feel equal when you're in a circle because nobody's better than the other. You're all part of the same. And I think that, and we all help each other. In the circle, oftentimes we hold hands, so that's to bring people together and raise us all up together. So I want to say that as we go forward and talk about this, and you may have a seat, thank you very much for being part of this. But I think that you'll see going forward how enriching this can be, and including the original peoples of the land, because we have an innate knowledge of the lands, the other beings on those lands, the animals, the fish, the winged creatures. And we have that, and that understanding that's still unique. We still live on the land, we still rely on the land and make our livelihoods on the land. And so it's so important that any development that takes place or doesn't take place because maybe we don't want development, I think that has to be honored and that it has to be recognized. So I want to thank you all, and as we embark on these proceedings over the next 3 days, and welcome everyone to this. And we look forward to all of your input, your comments, and making this valuable project. Miigwech.
Thank you so much for those very pressing remarks to make us think of ourselves as a community and the connections among us. And we hope to do that with this project. We hope to create global connections, in fact, and lasting relationships. I now ask Marie-Chantal Gerard to provide us with a few remarks, the Vice President of Policy and Communications for Canada Economic Development for Quebec Regions.
Thank you, Tamara. Kwe Tiaweng. Bonjour, welcome. Buenos dias, bienvenido. Thank you, Siwi that just left us, and Elder Maha for welcoming us and having with us our international guests in this wonderful Huron-Wendat territory, and for your support to this project. I would like to thank all of you for accepting our invitation to this very important session, launching not only the project, but also a great collaboration around linking Indigenous communities with regional development. Thank you. It's a great privilege for me to be here today with you, and I'm pleased to see colleagues, members from the OECD team with us, supporting us in this endeavor, a representative of Indigenous communities and leaders from Canada, but also from other countries. With us in this great collaboration, we will have colleagues from Australia, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Sweden, US. We also have the support from the European community, and throughout the day you will see that they will join us into one shape or another. Representatives also from First Nation of Quebec and Labrador Economic Development Commission, colleagues from the provincial government, colleagues from Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, welcome. Next to me, sitting my colleague, is Mr. Shang, Director General at INAC, a wonderful partner, and his team, as well as mine, that I've worked extremely hard with the OECD team to organize this event. It has been a lot of work. It has been a year of having this vision and trying to bring it forward and to bring it to fruition. So welcome and thank you to all of the contributors. I would also like to extend special thanks on my right to Ms. Dawn Medovich. She is, in her day-to-day life, the chair of the National Economic Development Board, but she's also accepted with great enthusiasm, and I would add generosity, to be our Canadian Indigenous leader to this project, and she's already contributed greatly to its success. So thank you very much. I also welcome colleagues from other regional development agencies across the country and Statistics Canada that will be supporting us in this work, as well as other partners who will join us today, as I said, via video conference or no doubt that these technological experiments will work in our favor, I'm sure, because we want to be as inclusive and as productive as we can be throughout this project. So we need to be creative, we need to be patient, and we need to be flexible, and no doubt we will achieve success. Because well-being and inclusion of Indigenous people is a key priority for the Government of Canada. And this is a great opportunity to be part of an international collaborative project with several other countries that do share this view and this vision under the leadership of the OECD. This project will no doubt contribute significantly for all of us to the assessment of our regional policies and programs, so we can better deliver inclusive growth for Indigenous people and know how to make sure that they contribute to their full potential to our economic prosperity, as our previous speaker mentioned. To that end, it was essential for us to involve Indigenous representatives and communities from the beginning of this project to make sure that communities and their vision would be an integral part of this project. I'm sure today's discussion will be very rich and interesting. And in that regard, I'm hoping also that our discussion will also allow us to start building more personal relationships, if not friendships, that will last beyond the duration of this project. Es una gran oportunidad para compartir las lecciones de política aprendidas y conocimientos sobre el desarrollo económico regional indígena y discutir la metodología del proyecto. Indeed, it is a great opportunity for us to share policy lessons and insights in relation to Indigenous economic development, and also discuss amongst ourselves the methodology of this project. This will ensure that the outcomes of this project will benefit Indigenous communities in our respective countries and allow them to fully participate to our economic growth. So, muchas gracias a todos. Thank you very much to all of you. I look forward to our productive discussions and to achieving great success with this project. So on that note, I would now invite Chris McDonald from the OECD to speak to us a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very Chantal. First of all, I'd like to thank the Huron-Wendat people for welcoming us onto their land and to hold this event, the starting event for our project. I'll also put forward my apologies for the head of the rural program at the OECD, Enrique Gassalazo, who was meant to be here but had a family issue that meant he couldn't leave Paris, and also to my fellow countryman, Warren Mundine, who will be the Indigenous champion for Australia. He had an issue with his flight, his plane in Sydney, which means that he'll be here tomorrow. But I spoke to Dawn before, who has met Warren, and I think it's great that someone of his stature and also Dawn's stature is able to give their time and commitment to this project. I think first it's important to note that being on this land is important from a symbolic point of view, but also a substantive point of view. And I think throughout this project, we need to engage and work with Indigenous communities through the whole process. And if we don't do that, then it won't work. So that's a commitment from us as an institution, and it's a commitment from the governments which have provided the financial support to enable us to undertake this project. So I'm from the OECD, and I'll talk a bit about what the OECD is, but it is an international organisation based in Paris, which I guess in a broad sense enables governments to share lessons and develop better policies about economic development. I work in the regional development area, which focuses on how to help regions maximise their growth potential. So we develop data and analysis about regions and cities, and also what are the policies which enable those places to maximise their potential. And we see Indigenous communities as a very important part of that equation, and so we want to apply that approach that we've developed in the OECD to questions of Indigenous economic development. And if we talk about it from an Indigenous point of view, if we talk about self-determination, if we talk about self-governance, partly that is dependent on rights, on the legal framework within which Indigenous communities operate, but it also depends on, if you like, self-sufficiency, about income, about jobs, about businesses. And I think this facility is a very good example of that, and something which, or the sort of examples that we can learn from as we undertake this project. So as Marie Chantal mentioned, we've been on a journey so far to get to this point. This is the starting line. At this event, we'll share with you how we think, based on the dialogue we've had with you already, about what this project can do. We want to test that with you. We want to get your thoughts on it. And then after that, at this event, be in a position to begin to work with you to implement it. I very much look forward to working with all of you on this project. The words of from Dawn and Conrad and the opening prayer were powerful and very motivating for us. So I'll leave it at that point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, everyone. We would like to now, first of all, acknowledge that Patrick Johansson from the government of Sweden is online and watching us, as I understand. So hello, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us okay. Let us know if you don't. And now we will be, as I understand, doing a group photo, if you will. Yes, right? Yes. Now, and if you just join us over here onto the left, and we'll organize ourselves and do a launch photo. Okay, so, and then we'll reconvene right away. Outside the room, over to the left, near, you'll see, I'll direct you.
Okay. Just a reminder before we start to please fill out the authorization for the use of the photograph that we just took. Thank you. And so in this second session, we will be introducing the general framework and approach for the project. And Chris will start us off with a presentation about the framework, followed by a panel discussion.
Okay, thanks everyone. I normally prefer to stand, but I'll have to sit today. So what I wanted to do was just to give you an overview about the project. As I mentioned, we started this dialogue 18 months ago about this project. Some of you were involved in that dialogue, some of you have joined it at later points as we build this alliance. And so today I just wanted to give an overview about where we've come from, what we would like the project to achieve, and how we think it will be able to achieve that. And I'll run through those points which are there on the slide. Just a moment. As I said before, I'm from the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, and so some of you may have worked with the OECD before, and some of you may not. But I thought it would be useful to explain where I come from an institutional point of view. The OECD was set up after the Second World War to help the European economies reconstruct after the damage which was created by the war. Basically on the principle that countries to advance their economies would benefit from sharing lessons about good practices and through peer review as well. So being able to review each other's policies, to share lessons and to develop better policies at a domestic level. The OECD was officially created in 1961 and since has grown to 35 member countries. The work of the OECD is organised around committees upon which the member countries sit, and countries also which are not members but are involved in the work of the OECD, which includes countries like Colombia and Peru. The area, as I mentioned, that I work in is regional development. We have a regional development policy committee, and this is the structure under which this project will be developed. So I'll just run through the slides I have, but hopefully they'll come up on the board soon. So in terms of the journey so far, over a number of years, we've developed different reviews which look at economic development at a regional level across different countries. And when we did work in Latin America, in particular, in Chile, in Peru, and in Colombia, and also work that we did in northern Scandinavia, which involved northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland, we came across the issues around Indigenous communities and economic development. And when we looked at that issue, we could see a number of things coming up. The first is that Indigenous communities they had assets, they had unique skills, they had unique knowledge, they had land in some cases which they owned and could develop. But generally what we found is that they were not part of the development process, as in integrated into the decision making about regional development. And as a result of that exclusion, it contributed firstly to the poorer socio-economic outcomes which we generally experienced, but also this issue also led to regions not taking full advantage of their assets either. And we had our Canadian peer reviewers on the review that we did in Northern Scandinavia, and they indicated an interest in developing this work. And so we developed a paper and took it to our committee, and we invited representatives of the Sami Parliament of Sweden and also the Indigenous Peoples Secretariat of the Arctic Council to come and talk to our committee about their vision for development and some of the challenges that they faced. And then out of that, we have then developed this project over the 12-month period, which now involves a number of countries. And I think now that we have the project up and running, I think another few countries will also join in future. So in terms of the purpose of the project is first and foremost to deliver policy recommendations for governments. It's also to deliver recommendations for Indigenous communities as well about how to better link them with regional development efforts. So in terms of when I talk about regional development, what it starts off with is, again, how to maximise the potential of different regions, whether they are rural regions, whether they are metropolitan regions. And what the OECD recommends is that there's a particular approach to policies which enable regions to do that. And those features are identified on the slide. It's about having a clear strategy or vision for development. It's about ensuring that vision is based on assets and not problems, not necessarily problems or challenges. And also that the approach to development is negotiated, and it's negotiated between levels of government, and it also involves communities and stakeholders at the local level as well. So in a broad sense, when we're talking about our regional development approach, they are the key features that we're talking about. And in terms of different policy issues, it encompasses a number of areas that are involved in growing regional economies. It's about infrastructure, it's about human capital, it's about innovation, about working with business. It's also about land and how you govern land, how you develop land, and importantly, how you bring policies together at a local and regional level to make sure they are coherent and they are matched to the needs and circumstances of different regions. So another strong message that we have is that governments, in terms of how they design policies, cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach. Those policies need to be adapted to the circumstances of different regions. So in terms of why we think this approach is important for Indigenous communities, I think the first and most basic point is the importance of land. Land is critical to the reproduction of Indigenous language and culture. Indigenous communities are distributed unevenly across national territories. They're quite diverse. They have different histories, they have different languages, they have different relationships with land. So in a sense, and also land is a key asset as well for Indigenous communities. So an important starting point in terms of place-based policies is obviously this importance of land to Indigenous language and culture, but also Indigenous economic development. And then, the map just shows the distribution of Indigenous populations in the Arctic, just to demonstrate that point. And that's the other presentation. Sorry. Yeah. The other chart that we'll show in a minute up there was about gaps in socio-economic outcomes between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations. So obviously it's important to focus on assets and strengths, but it's also important to recognise this issue of gaps and the importance of inclusive growth as well. And so generally, when you look across different OECD countries with an Indigenous population, you see gaps in key socioeconomic outcomes like labour force participation, unemployment, and so forth. So the OECD as an institution has a strong focus on inclusive growth, and we certainly see Indigenous communities as important to that overall agenda. Sorry, clicker's not working. Next one. Okay, so in terms of the rationale for the project, there's, as I said, there's this importance of place to Indigenous economic development. It's an important issue that's been identified in our committee by a number of countries, including the ones sitting around the table here. We feel that obviously Indigenous communities themselves already connect globally. We heard that before. We've heard different examples of that. But we can bring those connections into an institution like the OECD and not only develop dialogue between Indigenous communities, but also policymakers as well within the structure, which enables, again, the sharing of lessons and the development of better policies as well. Now, the OECD itself as an institution hasn't really focused on this issue strongly in the past. I have a colleague here from Lead, Jonathan, who's done some work on this. We've done some work on this. There has been little bits and pieces of work done, but it's certainly not done in a way which is sufficiently strategic in terms of the importance that it has to some of our member countries. So part of the purpose of this project is to develop a stronger focus within the OECD about Indigenous issues as an economic policy issue. And to do that, we're doing things like setting up a network internally within the OECD that can enable knowledge sharing about this project and other projects which are going on, which I think will benefit our work and again raise visibility about the issue. Next one. So in terms of the project itself, it's what we're thinking in terms of a global level is that it will address 4 key things. One is around development trends. What are the trends in Indigenous economic development? What are the factors which are important to Indigenous businesses and economic prosperity? What are the constraints? So that will be one part of the project. The second part will deal with issues around land. How to maximise the value of land and to develop land in a way which benefits Indigenous communities. The third is around business. How do you foster the growth of Indigenous businesses, and what are the different factors around skills, infrastructure, innovation, which help facilitate that. And fourth is around governance. How do you improve relationships between levels of government in terms of delivering policies for Indigenous communities to make sure that those policies are coherent and well connected at a local level, and also that communities themselves are involved in that process as well. In terms of what we will deliver, where we will deliver a thematic report which brings together lessons from different countries around those 4 themes. We'll work with each of the countries on a case study which can focus in on the issues which are of particular interest to them. Sorry.
Which one? Up and down?
Yeah. And then it's working now. And then the other part is on missions. These missions of the OECD are very important, not only for us, but also to bring peer reviewers from different countries, Indigenous leaders from different countries together and hold knowledge sharing activities and workshops so we build capacity and build networks throughout the project. In terms of what we'll draw in, we'll obviously look at the literature which already exists around these topics, which have already started. We will send surveys to countries to fill that in, to gather data as well. we will look at data which already exists online through census sources and so forth. And then we'll also draw in material from these knowledge sharing activities that we undertake as well. And I think importantly, the thing about the OECD is it can provide a platform to bring data together from different countries. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to bring basic data about how many Indigenous people are there in the OECD, where do they live, what kind of contribution do they make to regional and national economies, how much land do they own, how much land do they use. We don't know the answers to these questions at the moment. Unless you have answers to those basic questions, it is very difficult to design effective policies. So that's another great opportunity that we have in this project. And as I mentioned, there's not only work in the centre that we are in around regional and local development, looking at these issues, but there's also work going on in other parts of the OECD around education, school education, around land and the environment, around agriculture. So we're very conscious in this project that we're able to draw in these different areas of expertise within the OECD into this project. There's just a few images there on the slides, I guess, to give a bit of life and colour to the kinds of activities that we'll hold. So one of them there is one of these knowledge sharing activities that we hold, so where we bring experts and policy makers and Indigenous leaders from different countries together to talk about strategies for development, things they've learned. We'll have opportunities to present to committees at the OECD, which again is very important in terms of developing institutional knowledge and visibility around this issue. We'll go on missions as well, and at the end we'll have a report as well. So I'm just showing a report up there that we did on the northern sparsely populated area. So we will have a report that then governments and Indigenous communities can use. In terms of the timeline, what we're obviously starting now, this is the starting line. And we'll gather data in the next couple of months. We'll hold missions in the first half of next year, or up until September. So we need to talk to each of the countries about the timing of those missions and where they want us to go and who they want us to engage with. And then we intend to launch around April, May in 2019. Perhaps we can launch here. Who knows? And then I've just identified some of the key outcomes there. I think one is around that, by engaging the OECD, you get an objective assessment of policies. In a way, we can also play a bit of a role as an honest broker as well. Through the thematic report and the case studies, we'll deliver tailored advice to each country about changes that they need to make to promote Indigenous economic development in a regional context. I think even through the process so far, in Canada, for example, we've developed stronger relationships at an institutional level between different agencies, and so we can also apply that role as well. Importantly, through the missions, through the peer review, through the activities like we're doing today, we can develop a common pool of knowledge about these issues as well. And lastly, which is particularly important for us as an international institution focused on economic policy issues, is that we develop a stronger agenda within our institution about Indigenous economic development as well, which we see as important. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're now open to a panel discussion from our Indigenous leaders. We'd very much like to hear their reflections on this structure and on the way that our framework is structured, and any advice that they may wish to give us. And for that, we'll be hearing from Ms. Dawn Leach, representing Canada, Mr. Stefan Mikkelsen, representing Sweden, and Luis Marin Nevarez Ficimena and Rogelio Mendoza Gomez, representing Colombia. Thank you so much for traveling all this way, all of you, and for providing such leadership on this project. So we have about half an hour for a discussion now, and I'd like to start off with the question, what lessons and advice can you give us all about undertaking this work? What lessons and advice do you have for us? And any reflections on the framework presented as well. And I welcome whomever wishes to speak first to just indicate to me. And we can go around that way. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much for the lecture. My name is Stefan Mikkelson, and I am recently elected chair of the Livelihood Committee just 2 weeks ago. Previous to that, I was chairing the Sami Parliamentary Assembly for 2 terms of office for 8 years, and prior to that, I was deputy chair of the Parliamentary Assembly. There is a huge belief in the growth economy in Europe, and that mega projects are the solutions to employment, to have good employment numbers, to have increased profits. The profits should always increase, and also to make the infrastructure of the society to maintain at least at the same level as it is, and not to decline. However, the experience that we have of Swedish membership in the European Union is more or less the opposite. I'm living in the part of Sweden or part of Europe that is called northern sparsely populated areas, and that is named so, labeled so, because there are very few inhabitants there, and they are getting fewer. At the time of Swedish membership in the European Union, 1995, in my northernmost country, Norfolk, and nearly 266,000 inhabitants, and it has going down with 18,000 until 2012. Despite the forestry, the huge forestry cutting that has been going on, despite the building dams and destroying the river, mainly the Luna River, but also others, despite the attempts to establish new mining activities, already knowing in advance that the amount of ore or the amount of mining possibilities were low already at the beginning with the current market prices, and despite that, the belief was so strong that they would solve by a mysterious way. The company would solve the need for having a surplus in the economy, which of course they did not have. And in several cases they have gone bankrupt, and the public has now to take care of the mining the remains of the mines and the leaking of poisonous and hazardous materials to the groundwater. And this has, of course, affected not only indigenous peoples, but also the dominating society. And they have learned a lesson. It was hard-fought because it is the coming generations that will have to suffer from this. But I believe that the Swedish state participation in this project is because they have seen something happen that they could not believe that happened before, that these kind of mega projects can go bankrupt. The solution that indigenous peoples are not part of the problem. We are part of the solution. And this is an old statement, so, but it's also very relevant in this aspect, both when it comes to small-scale projects, to culture, to ensure rights to food sovereignty, so you can control your own food production. That is also very important in an unsecure world. And today in my country, a little more than 20% of the food that we are eating on a daily basis are produced in the country. You can believe what happens when there will be a stop in the mechanisms that are sending food to the north, and then sometimes from far away distances. So this is also a very important aspect. And in Italy, there was a development by Italian men who realized that all the small shops were disappearing, the slaughterhouse or the bakery or whatever it was. They disappeared, and they became shown up huge supermarkets that sold very, very poor selection with low quality, and he did not like that. So he was thinking about, and Mr. Carlo Petrini came out with a slow food. that it should be, and slow food is very good because it also has a cultural value. A food without a cultural value is not a particularly good food, and it is not ethnicity or also non-indigenous can have a slow food concept on their traditional food with a cultural background, and it's very important that this slow food is a concept that is very good. In Jokkmokk, not so far away from where I live, has it been an indigenous people's Taramar, where we discuss this kind of topics. I believe after that it has had one in England. But these are very, very, very good phenomena, and I believe OECD has really been thinking very good. It could have been better, of course, but that is always the case. It could have been better. Maybe the outcome will be even better than expected. So with our help, I believe so. And indigenous peoples are not a threat to the dominating society. As in my country, we like to have Swedish neighbors, but if our neighbors are need to destroy the environment or the nature, then there is a problem. And I try to say that human rights for Sami people are not a threat to human rights for non-indigenous people. So the fastest or easiest, I would say, is small-scale project, include involvement of indigenous people and involvement of indigenous women. In many countries, indigenous women are discriminated by law. In Sweden, it happens the same in Reindeer Husbandry Act from 1971. The annual meeting of the Sami village occur, then the husband goes and votes for the family votes at the annual meeting. And of course, that is not how it should be, but that is how the Swedish lawmaker wanted it to be in 1971. So involvement, and we are here, so we are involved, but also going down to the grassroots. Canada is a huge country, and lack of what we have in Nordic countries. I mean, infrastructure for society, and we have roads everywhere, or we have plenty of airports in Norway, northern Norway, and we also have state acceptance. For instance, Norway has ratified ILO 169. So I salute the Norwegian government and the Stortinget, and also the Norwegian king stated several times that Norway is founded on the territory of two peoples, the Norwegian people and the Sami people. And it's a very broad-minded statement of the king. I will now end for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now invite other leaders to provide us advice or recommendations on this project. And we'll see how many questions we can get in, but we have other questions for you, but we'll keep an eye on the time. Columbia or okay, and we will need to be putting on the headset.
Primero que todo, muchas gracias por la invitación que nos hicieron a este país colombiano, en la cual hacemos representación de una mínima parte de los pueblos que existimos en Colombia, que son más de 83 pueblos. Actualmente, a través de este acercamiento, agradecerle a la comunidad que existe en este país por acogernos y por ser participativo en esta asamblea de hermandad como pueblos indígenas. Como es importante mirar en este marco del proyecto, en donde se tienen en cuenta las prioridades de las problemáticas de tantas que tienen los pueblos indígenas en diferentes países, es emprender unos procesos directos con aquellas afectaciones que sufrimos en varios países de pueblos indígenas, de no poder tener un desarrollo económico sostenible y claro, que vaya enfocado a las necesidades de problemáticas que existen en diferentes pueblos a nivel del mundo. Para nosotros es importante participar en este escenario para crear y conocer de fondo las experiencias que hay a nivel de todos los pueblos indígenas a nivel del mundo, porque nosotros hacemos parte de un pueblo donde actualmente existe la biodiversidad, existe la naturaleza, existe una cultura propia. Hay una serie de riquezas muy natural que en la cual pues hasta ahora no se ha podido explorar de reconocimiento a nivel del mundo. Por lo tanto, a través de estos proyectos queremos sugerir que fuera más de fondo a los territorios y construir unas proyecciones que vayan resolviendo las experiencias propias de cada pueblo, no construirlo desde lo externo y pensar en nosotros cuando no se adopte a nuestra necesidad, a nuestras problemáticas reales, en donde estemos viviendo. En otras expresiones que hemos podido entender en este compartimiento de diálogo, lo importante es que hemos reflejado de que todos somos seres humanos, que estamos en este planeta, y que también debemos apoyar a la conservación de las culturas nativas de los pueblos en varios sitios donde estemos, que aún existe como el valor de poder seguir conservando y manejando un tema de la biodiversidad de nuestras costumbres propias, que milenariamente pues se ha venido sosteniendo y que cada pueblo han venido teniendo en su ámbito cultural, en su ámbito de ceremonias, varias mitologías que emprende cada pueblo. Es importante estar nosotros aquí para poder llevar experiencias e ir pensando cómo implementar estos modelos de proyecto económico que realmente resuelvan los problemas de necesidades en las cuales estemos viviendo varios países a nivel del interior de cada pueblo. De tal forma hemos visto de que el tema de alternativas económicas para los pueblos indígenas, en el caso de nosotros, existe una serie de biodiversidad todavía intocable, pero que hay que comenzar a explorar realmente que se acople a la necesidad de la dinámica cultural de cada pueblo, que no vaya a afectar esas costumbres propias que tenemos, que no vaya a sacarnos de esa cultura propia, sino que más bien vaya fortaleciendo ese conocimiento cultural de nosotros. De tal forma que es importante emprender esos proyectos, modelos, construidos conjuntamente, desde las expectativas y necesidades que cada pueblo miremos que sea conveniente implementar en nuestra región, con nuestros pueblos y con nuestras costumbres. Recomendaciones, lo que podríamos mirar es de que estos sistemas de encuentro, de intercambio, de experiencia, pues se vaya dando a través de ir nutriendo más conocimiento en otros espacios del país donde creemos necesidad de irnos encontrando, de irnos construyendo más las propuestas para así en general presentar como una propuesta colectiva de cómo podemos entender realmente las necesidades básicas de un proyecto de economía de alternativa sostenible para los pueblos indígenas. Eso sería como mi explicación. Vengo de la Amazonía colombiana, de un Amazonas, un departamento del Amazonas que se llama el pulmón del mundo. Soy del pueblo Huitoto, es mi pueblo. En lengua es muina, digamos, un dialecto propio que tenemos, y todavía compartimos. Ahí traigo unas artesanías, pues más luego lo mostraríamos, unas coronas, que hacen parte de la ritualidad dentro pues, de nuestros sistemas culturales propios. Muchas gracias, muy contento de haber estado en esta conferencia y en este país.
Tengan muy buenos días aquí los presentes. Como bien saben, mi nombre es Luz María Narváez, vengo del país colombiano. Soy perteneciente también al departamento del Amazonas, soy indígena, Utoto, Muro y Muina. Muy agradecida, me siento muy feliz de estar aquí, de participar y ser un participante más o sea, a nivel mundial, que nos caracteriza como pueblos indígenas. O sea, me siento muy feliz. En estos procesos que se traen, diría que estos proyectos serían de muy buen beneficio para los pueblos indígenas. En el caso, en el país de Colombia, nosotros sufrimos algunas problemáticas, más que todo en el sistema de la tecnología, que estamos muy aislados de mayor conocimientos, la comunicación, porque por el sector donde nosotros vivimos, en la Amazonía, estamos muy lejos de las cabeceras municipales, entonces estamos muy descomunicados, y un factor muy que nos afecta es la comunicación, porque por allá estamos muy aislados de la comunicación, no entra la señal. Entonces, estos procesos que se traen es muy importante para que los pueblos indígenas vayan civilizándose más, vayan teniendo más conocimientos, y a partir de esos proyectos que se traen lanzando, que los niños, las futuras generaciones vayan mejorando, vayan conociendo el mundo occidental. Es muy importante para nosotros llevar estos conocimientos, difundirlos allá, qué procesos se traen, qué es lo mejor para nosotros como pueblos indígenas, que podemos recibir conocimientos y ponerlos en prácticas para el desarrollo de nuestro vivir, nuestra economía, parte de la salud, bueno, todo lo que tenga que ver con el mejoramiento de los ámbitos territoriales como pueblos indígenas para un mejor desarrollo de nuestro vivir a largo plazo. Me siento muy contenta, agradeciéndoles aquí a todos los presentes, y espero que esto sea de buen resultado para nosotros como pueblos indígenas, y muchas gracias. Espero tener muchos conocimientos de aquí para difundirlos en mi país y en mi región donde vivo, donde realmente vivo en mi pueblo indígena. Entonces me siento muy feliz y agradeciéndoles a todos, que Dios y la Virgen nos proteja y que esto sea de buen resultado. Muchas gracias.
Next. My background is working with the communities in our region as investing in Indigenous businesses, and finance Indigenous businesses. And I've been doing that for almost 30 years, working with our people. Through the work that I do, we've helped to create 3,500 Indigenous businesses in all sectors, doing all kinds of amazing things. Like we have a woman who, her company manufactures artificial limbs. We have another person I was talking about who manufactures parking meters that he sells to Canada and the US. We have businesses in tourism, construction, retail, and I was mentioning earlier to some people that even we have 3 of our businesses have won the Juno Music Awards in Canada. So I'm very proud of the people I work with, and I can tell you that the work that we do for a large region in central Canada, when we invest in our business people, we give them financing, they have to turn around and buy supplies in that region. And so the region benefits. So that's what I believe, is that Indigenous regional engagement to me means supporting the original inhabitants of the land to make informed decisions on any development on their traditional lands and resources. Involving us helps to grow the region. But it also means respecting and honoring the decision sometimes not to develop those lands and resources if the community so choose. We see what's happening in the world today. If you take a snapshot of Google Earth, you look at that today and compare it to even 10 years ago, and you see all the development, all the clear cutting, all the open lines that exist. When you have to connect Indigenous people to the way the earth is today. I think it's so important that we realize that Indigenous people have an attachment to the land that other cultures or other businesses or governments may not understand. For example, my language, the Anishinaabe, our language, is the root. The land is the root of our language. It's connected to the land. Let me tell you that in our language, the word for the earth is ki. That's the ki is in there. That's Mother Earth. That's what it means in our language. You look at words like lightning. In our language, we say nimki, which means the light that touches the earth and the sky. When you look at a word like mukki, in our language, ki, again, means the being that lives in the earth, and that's a frog. When we describe, when we say ke wenzi, that's our word for old man, and that means the man that's facing towards the earth. The root of our words is from the earth. It's not out of anything else. That's how come we have that connection. It's not something that's made up. It's who we are, that strong connection. Many Indigenous people are surviving from these lands and the resources as they always have done for thousands of years, supporting their livelihoods as hunters, fishers, and gatherers. That's what we've always done and still do today. And around the world, I see that. You know, unfortunately, there are also those genuine stories worldwide where Indigenous, and worldwide and here in Canada as well, where Indigenous people have been hoodwinked and then exploited for access to resources on their traditional lands. That's because they were not given the opportunity to make an informed decision. They did not know or understand the data or the impacts of any development, or some were forcibly removed from their lands to allow for development. That is why in my area, one of the things that we're doing that we hope might even be helpful to all of Canada is we're developing a Center of Excellence for Indigenous Mineral Development. That center would be a clearinghouse of information and a place where Indigenous people could go when they're presented with, by maybe a mining company wants to say, you want to do some business in your territory. I've been on my own First Nation council, elected council we have. I've served, and I remember an incident where we were contacted by a mining company, and they said, we would like to speak to you about doing business in your territory. And we had a big, in our council chambers, we had a big table, and it was piled about this high, the whole table, with binders and reports from this company. We had no idea, and they wanted to say, could you, we'd like to do business, and here's our reports if you want to look at them. We couldn't read those or understand those reports. So how can we make an informed decision? We couldn't. And that's how it is for most indigenous people around the world. They don't know. They can't make an informed decision. We are starting to have, I should tell you, we do have our young people now studying and engineering and becoming chemists and learning the sciences, but not enough yet to be able to read that whole table full of reports and give us a synopsis. So this Center of Excellence, we would see as a place where we can find the expertise to put all this data in layman's terms for us. And to help educate our people, and there has to be an understanding that becoming educated on any development takes a long time. You have to, in our cultures, I think it's similar from what I've seen everywhere else, you have to consult with all the people. It can't just be the council that makes a decision. All the people must understand what's being put before them. However, there's also indigenous communities who have their own expertise, have developed their own expertise and chosen to develop their lands and resources sustainably. There are First Nations in Canada who have entered into resource development agreements on their own terms. I've looked at many of those agreements, and it's good that they've taken the time to decide, but oftentimes the agreements are still not the best agreements. Because in the end, the indigenous people aren't part of any decision-making process as those companies come in and do the work that they want to do. And we understand that we need natural resources to make steel, to make glass, to make everything that we survive on today, and the technology that we're using to cast this, have this meeting cast around the world through technology. We know that natural materials are needed, but I think we need to look at ways to do it in more sustainable ways. And I think it would be so helpful to involve indigenous people in the decision-making ongoing throughout the life of any project to help make decisions. I know that because we've sometimes blocked projects that have happened, that those companies have been forced to look at different ways to do the business, to make it so that it's more environmentally sensitive because of the opposition that indigenous people have presented. And I think that's made projects much better going forward. But so we do have some good examples, and I hope that maybe we can share some of those as we go along in the next couple of days. But we need to really look at a process that's going to make sure that indigenous people can have that opportunity to make informed decisions and to be involved in the life of a project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Would anyone like to comment on any of the remarks that were made? Otherwise, I can go. Maybe we can save time at the end as well, but otherwise I'll go into the next question. The next question really is a follow-up question that each of the panelists here have remarked on a type of form of economic development that is sustainable development, that is culturally sensitive and culturally led development, that is maybe not entirely a conventional model for economic development, that it's different. And you've also remarked on about the importance of the fundamental governance mechanisms behind development processes. And what I would like to ask you all is, what are the main areas of economic development opportunity that you see in your communities that sort of exemplify such an approach? That you've described development processes, but what are some of the key opportunities that are really embedded in the territories and communities where you live that you think exemplify this type of economic development? If you could just highlight some examples for us of best practices, which Dawn, you've done a few so far. Would anyone like to remark on that? Stefan Mikkelsen? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. was very interesting to hear the statements from my colleagues. And I will just mention as a pure coincidence, I visited only in Bogota, in Colombia, the headquarters of Organización Nacional Indígenas de Colombia in 2009. And 2011, the organization sent a delegation to Sami Parliament. We held a meeting in Norway, on Norwegian side. And later we had parliamentarian conference and on equal part there. So we are already connecting with indigenous peoples, despite language problems, despite problems with travel costs, etc., because it's beneficial to us. The main interest for small-scale entrepreneurs in Sweden and Finland at the moment are actually experience tourism, not mass tourism necessarily, but this kind of experience tourism that people who can afford to pay also wants to experience the darkness, the coldness, the long winter in a genuine atmosphere by people who live on the earth from the beginning of time. And this is also what they are more and more asked for. And sometimes it can be so that only a few visitors can pay a lot to experience something unique in the world and also very safe. You don't see so much other people than the guide and the guides maybe, but you can experience the traditional food, you can experience maybe the reindeers or sled dogs, and you can see the protected areas where they are still existing also in Sweden, and enjoy the nature and see the moon and the stars in the middle of the night. It's a magic experience. Much more, to me, it's much more of value than the aurora borealis, the Nordic lights. So it's a promising of coldness, so you don't want to see that so often. But the full moonlight is a wonderful experience in the middle of the night. So I can imagine people pay for that. But also the indigenous cuisine, the traditional foods that are delivered by indigenous peoples from traditional areas. That is the two main objects that I find, but also the traditional culture and the handicraft. The handicrafts are sought after and maybe should also be highly valued. I mean, they're increasing in prices. While we talk about this, I forgot to mention about the status report that came about the conditions for indigenous peoples, and was produced by Permanent Forum. It came in 2010. It is a good thing to increase the knowledge and to read some of the summary findings that they have there. 5% of the world population are indigenous, but they consist of 1/3 of the group of extreme hungry and extreme poor. So everything we do to adjust this to a better ratio is beneficiary for our sisters and brothers in various parts of the world. Well, thank you.
Here from Columbia.
De acuerdo a las preguntas de las actividades diarias, para nosotros como pueblos indígenas de Colombia tenemos 3 líneas importantes. Primero, el territorio. Pues porque el territorio tiene que ver mucho en el ámbito cultural y social de los pueblos. La interconexión desde su conocimiento y su cosmovisión, de su cultura para el manejo. Lo segundo es el tema de la agricultura propia. Tenemos un sistema propio de economía de seguridad alimentaria, propiamente con los cultivos propios, semillas propias, nativas, es que ha sido como el modelo de subsistencia de vida de nosotros como subsistencia en los territorios. El tercer área que tenemos es la biodiversidad, la parte de los recursos naturales, la parte hídrica, la ecología silvestre, una serie de ecosistemas que tenemos que aún pues son intactos y que pueden haber mecanismos de seguir explorando, que ahí vamos a encontrar varias expectativas de soluciones que puedan resolver en un futuro cualquier actividad de subsistencia de economía propia que podemos sustraer de esa biodiversidad que tenemos. También es importante mirar como áreas el tema del etnoturismo, que sea étnico, no un turismo de sustraer o de dañar el ambiente, sino que sea un turismo más ecológico, porque allí existe una biodiversidad muy intacta, muy riquísima de poder explorar. Varias expectativas aún intactas que existen. El otro tema que hemos siempre mantenido como pueblos de área es nuestra cultura. Existe un sistema de infraestructura propia todavía. Nuestra lengua, nuestro sistema de vivir dentro de la naturaleza. También es mirar como área, digamos, todos estos programas externos que puedan entrar a nuestra región, pues sea de una manera gradual, no directa, porque pueda atropellar nuestro sistema de vida. Y es en la cual pues hemos mirado de que han habido modelos de que han querido entrar de lleno sin ningún mecanismo de prevención y han tenido como un aislamiento de algunos pueblos de ir perdiendo las costumbres, las culturas, las lenguas, el sistema de vida propio, pues por adoptar programas que no han sido proyectados, construidos desde el conocimiento cultural de cada pueblo. También, como áreas, hemos visto de que es importante mirar el sistema de educación propio, el sistema de gobierno, gobernanza propia, como pueblos, el sistema de la salud, que es prioridad de nuestra región, porque hemos sufrido de varias dificultades externas de otros ambientes, y es un aislamiento, digamos, de poder prevenir algunas enfermedades que no son curativas, que no son propias de nuestro medio, pero existen mecanismos también propios de nosotros, pero es difícil en nuestro país mirar las garantías en el tema de salud. Hay que emprender un modelo de salud propia, un modelo de educación propia, un sistema de gobierno propio, para ir a la par con el Estado, donde pertenecemos, para ir apoyando, fortaleciendo una gobernanza pues, colectiva, conectada, que tengan en cuenta cuáles son realmente las problemáticas de los pueblos, porque a veces se ignoran o no se tienen en cuenta. Dentro también de las áreas hemos visto de que es importante crear un modelo de conservación. En nuestro país se habla mucho de conservación, se habla mucho de la biodiversidad, pero no se tienen en cuenta los pueblos nativos, que realmente lo vivimos, lo protegemos y la cuidamos, sino se han tenido como el nombre de un modelo de conservación, simplemente teniendo en cuenta de los modelos propios de los pueblos, pero no han llegado los programas directamente a fortalecer esos modelos propios que tienen los pueblos indígenas del país. Aunque existe esa conservación propia, pero los programas no han podido resolver algunas de esas problemáticas de áreas que he informado. Por último, que tenemos aquí también como áreas, es mirar cómo construir equitativamente todas esas influencias de programas, que a veces como pueblo lo tenemos, pero como no se da a conocer, sino se implementan ideas que puedan ser buenas, pero como no es construida, entonces tenemos dificultades de conexión de conocimiento. Pues por única razón de no sentarnos en el diálogo, porque para nosotros es importante el diálogo con pueblo, no tanto una metodología de agenda, de discurso, sino sentarnos a acordar qué vamos a hacer, para qué, cuál es el objetivo y a cuántos tiempos nos comprometemos de seguir fortaleciendo esa convivencia social para mantener nuestra identidad cultural, nuestra conservación, toda la parte dinámica que puede existir en el país, en los pueblos, y la condición de hermandad del conocimiento. Eso pues podríamos expresarle por el momento en las áreas que hemos tenido en cuenta. Muchas gracias.
Don, would you have
I've met, I'm really sorry that Warren Mundine isn't here, and Chris will know this. One of the things that I found as a best practice, a leading practice, is something that happens in Australia through Reconciliation Australia, is where they have companies develop reconciliation action plans. I really like that. Those plans are published for anyone in the world to see on their website. There's over 600 of those reconciliation action plans there. And some of the companies that have done those are companies that operate around the world. So sometimes they'll do something different in Australia than what they do here in Canada, some of these companies. And because there's a different mindset. And I think it stems from the reconciliation, the idea of reconciliation. I think the world needs to become involved in reconciliation. When you do this, you're making a concerted effort to engage Indigenous people and to understand where they're coming from, understand their perspective. There's little steps that can be taken, but that may have a big impact. And there's also huge steps. Some of these companies are looking at Indigenous people on their boards of directors, but and some of them are doing things like when you come into their offices, it has the welcome in the local language, Indigenous language. It says, "Welcome, you're on the traditional territories." In Australia, you have the Larrakia people. Or in Canada, you're on the traditional territories of the Treaty 6 people. And as you have some of the signs in the language, it starts to teach the people who see those signs every day that language. But the history of colonization has been hidden under a rock for too long, and I think the world needs a reconciliation action plan. I think that's one of the things that we need to look at, so to understand the perspective of the Indigenous people and the horrendous history that has caused our people to be in the state that we're in today. You know, I look at that, I know you're looking for some solutions too, but one of the on a different topic, but I would like to go back to that, you know, throughout this 3 days, the theme of reconciliation action plans. But I'm going to go to a couple of examples of things that I really think that is interesting. I'm listening to my friends from Colombia speak, and one of the things that they talked about was, well, you spoke about was the fisheries. And in Canada, we have an Aboriginal aquaculture fisheries initiative, and in our area, we do grow rainbow trout, and this is one of the first areas where our communities are exerting their jurisdiction. They don't obtain provincial licenses or federal licenses, they just do it. They issue their own licenses, and they develop their own laws to regulate this and monitor it, which I think is wonderful. And through this initiative, one of the things that we're doing as well is we're working on aquaponics in the far north for food security purposes, which, You know, in that case, they're going to be growing fish, but also leafy vegetables or tomatoes, cucumbers, vegetables that aren't root vegetables. That'll be available to the community. And we know that in the far north, access to fresh produce is a real issue. So here's an area where Indigenous people, I think, around the world could excel. I believe in New Zealand that government gave the fisheries over to the Maori people in SeaWorld. They do a lot of the, they sell their product to the Asian market, and it's limitless. In our growing of rainbow trout, there's no competition because everything we produce is taken by the market right away. I think that, you know, we should be looking at some of those traditional industries and saying that those will be the industries set aside around the world for Indigenous people, because we've always relied on fisheries. We have historical evidence in our area that shows that we did fish cage weirs. We have underwater weirs. I think of in the Rama area in southern Ontario. There's other places around throughout Canada where they practice that, catching fish that way. That was one of our traditional ways, is aquaculture. And I think that you know, there's so many opportunities in that field of work that we not only provide income, a food source for our people, but also a food source for the world, where it's becoming more and more difficult to, you know, ensure food security around the world. So maybe this is something that we could look at. The other thing I think that a lot of Indigenous groups are becoming more and more involved in, I think of, well, that is the energy, green energy. And we have examples of that in Canada. I know where I live, the First Nations are 50% owners of 35 wind turbines there. You know, we didn't really want that at first. We were against that kind of power generation. But again, we started to make an informed decision about it. And there's wind turbines not far from where I live. I can see probably about 6 of them. And I was worried about the sound and everything like that. But we made sure that they were located in an area where there wasn't migratory bird patterns, or I don't hear anything. Like, it doesn't affect our community. And we have 6 nations, the largest First Nation in Canada in terms of population, and located in southern Ontario. They also have wind energy. I think they're the number of turbines they have. Hold on a second, and have that here. They have 6 solar farms and 7 wind farms. So that's in southern Ontario, where there's you know, they sell right to the grid. They're making money out of this. But I think that if there were areas that could be designated as, you know, those areas that could, where Indigenous people must be owner, decision maker of these kinds of businesses, I think that would really help, and it would help our economies. We could have education opportunity directed towards that sector for our people. We are right now through, for example, the aquaculture. We are training our young people in this field. So, and we have our own owners doing this. It's so interesting. Just to go back to that, one of the most successful, or the most successful fish cage or rainbow trout farm in our area is owned by an Ojibwe man who knew nothing really about aquaculture, but he knew fish. And he developed new technology and how to feed fish without wasting feed and everything like that. And his fish grow faster. He won't tell the industry what his secrets are, because he doesn't want, that's intellectual property. That's the other thing that he needs. So I think that there's an advantage when you work with the people who have the natural abilities to work in these types of sectors. That's all I'll say on that for now. Thank you.
those are inspiring examples from all of you, and that's exciting for us because we clearly see that there are opportunities to create some synergies that different groups in different countries are working, for instance, on culture-led tourism and ecotourism, and that we can maybe link up some initiatives to understand what frameworks help govern that and promote that and how that works.
I don't know if David, you're going to.
Yes. Did you want to? Did you have a further? Was there further remarks from Columbia? Otherwise, I will move on to the final question because it's really important that we have a break so that we can talk to each other. And the final question I want to ask, it's a very important one, and it's one that the OECD always asks. And what we would like to hear from you is if you just had one recommendation for your national government that you could make, just one recommendation to your national government to improve development outcomes for Indigenous communities, what would that one recommendation be? Did the translators catch that? Yeah.
Okay. We have right now that our government has accepted without qualification to recognize the declaration under United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. You know, that's just a declaration though. I would like to see that put into legislation so that it's part of Canada's law, and that I can't just have one recommendation. I have to say that also to implement the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that we had here in Canada. I think if Canada followed through on both of those items, then they would be an example for other countries to follow in terms of working with Indigenous people.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Stefan Mikkelsen, if you want to.
Thank you very much. I would like to say to the Swedish Parliament that they should immediately make it legal or involve Indigenous women in the Swedish law as based upon last year's development in human rights instrument like UN General Assembly decision about Declaration of Rights of the Indigenous Peoples. Today, the law are excluding some of the Indigenous women, and of course, it is painful to experience, and it is also negative to the Sami culture, since if Sami woman is not allowed by law to be in her traditional area and in the way she chooses, living on ancestors' land during summers, for instance, then it will also affect her will and possibility to bring on the culture, the traditional culture, to treat children, to grandchildren. In many cases, we have heard histories about women who have voluntarily hidden their ethnic origin, their origin as Indigenous people. So it will be less painful for the children and grandchildren. It can be better, of course, and it must be better. We have no time to lose. So this is my wish to the Swedish Parliament. Thank you.
Columbia.
Sí. Pues a través de como recomendación para nuestro país, pues nuestro país reconoce la biodiversidad étnica y cultural de nuestros pueblos, la reconoce. Lo que hacemos como recomendación es la construcción conjunta de unas políticas o modelos económicas propias participativas directamente con pueblos indígenas, no exactamente desde afuera, sino que construyamos conjuntamente y podamos ejecutar conjuntamente modelos de proyectos vinculantes a la realidad de nuestros pueblos, participación directa en nuestros pueblos, pues para hacer toda la gestión, toda la planeación, toda la ejecución que conlleve a la realidad de resolver las problemáticas al interior de cada pueblo. Eso es como nuestra recomendación.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
You wanted to answer that question too.
That's a good question, isn't it?
The Wendake Nation are Iroquois, which means that the Mohawks, Montreal, and Ontario, and ourselves are brought up by, the word is matriarcal in French, which means that the women had all these powers over the village and its population. They even decided who was going to be Grand Chief, who was going to be a chief of hunting, a chief for wars, to the point that as a lady, as a young girl running a boyfriend, her grandmother and mother had a right to send him home. And he lived in the house where the women, no women went to live with a man. The man came to live. And you see, my mother gave me the clan that I live by, which is the bear clan. My father could have been a deer, he could have been a bear, he could have been anything. But my mother said, "You're a bear." All that was lost when North America was invaded by Europeans. The basis of the First Nations is that there is no corners in a circle, a family circle, a circle of life. The woman is the man's equal. And I personally can say that I don't think that women are equal. We have to be very polite with the women surrounding us. They're the boss. And that was lost to the point that our creator for Wendakes and Mohawks is a woman. She came down from the heavens. She was falling, and a few major birds picked her up and brought her down to a turtle. And I said, "What are we going to do with her?" The muskrat brought some dirt and we put it on the back of the turtle. This turtle right here. These are the Americas. That's what the turtle became, the Americas. So we walked on the back of the turtle. And it all comes from our mothers. And that's why I'm always saying Mother Earth. I think that in Canada, we have politicians now that understand that more women into politics is going to make it better. It sure is going to help the way they speak in the chambers, and it used to be an awful language that the men use from one to the other, and it's changing. So I believe that like it was said before, everything comes from the earth. And anything you look at, in any indigenous people, whether it be in Canada or other places, like I had the opportunity of going to Finland with the Lapp people, and I felt at home. I felt that they even think the way we do. So it's not for the future, it's not way against First Nation. It has to be, let's understand each other and work together. And there's nothing small in life. Everything is equal. If in your reports you can come out and say, we're a real circle. Whether you come from Australia or Colombia or any part of the world, we are equal and we're going to work towards not a big company, not a small company, but companies that are going to make people happy and work together. In life, if you're not happy, you're nothing. So let's remember to not bring people down saying, well, you're indigenous, you're not our equal. We are all equal. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for their interventions. I think it's important for us to, certainly for us as the OECD team, is to reflect on what we're learning through the day. And I think it's important that you brought up this word of reconciliation. Now to me, reconciliation means respect. It means acknowledgement, and it means understanding. And that's what it means to me. And I think when we're talking about Indigenous economic development, we need to incorporate that concept into our work. And indeed, development itself is not a singular term. And even the OECD has come around to that. We used to talk about development in terms of income, but now we talk about development in terms of well-being. So it's different dimensions. It's not only about income, it's about health, it's about education, it's about the environment. So I think that vision for development based on values which are shared, needs to be something which flows through the work. Now, having said that, I think this focus on land is very important. Land is critical to, as I've said before, the reproduction of Indigenous language and culture. But land is also, it's contested. It's a complex issue, and I think we need to acknowledge that. The way that we're sort of thinking about land in this project is how you make land management work for regional economic development, and that means how do you make it work for Indigenous communities, and how do you make it work for regions as well. So what are the practices which enable you to do that? So I think that's something that we'll focus on, but certainly that's something we've heard from you. And in particular, it flows through into things like traditional knowledge, because Indigenous communities for thousands of years have managed the land. They provided stewardship of that land. One of the things that we're thinking about in this project is how you generate benefits from that. So there's a concept of environmental services. So I think we need to look at how the stewardship of water and land resources can be reflected in an economic sense as well. The other theme that came out for us is around data, because you need information about your local community, about your local economy, in order to make better decisions as well. So I think this focus on how you develop better data and how you develop the capacity to use that data in the development process is very important as well. The other key term that came to us was about informed decision making. So how do you, which again relates to the point about data, but also relates to the point about how institutions work, how they are respectful of Indigenous communities and how they are included in the decision-making process was opportunities. So we identified opportunities around tourism, which is sensitive to the environment, around food production, around energy as well. So how do you create an environment where these can take advantage of those sort of opportunities is something we'll also focus on. And lastly is the important point around gender, around the role of women in Indigenous communities, and how their role can be acknowledged and better reflected in policies as well. So for us as the OECD, I think they were the things that we learned from that session and we'll reflect on in terms of the design of our project.
And now I invite you all to refresh yourselves, take a break. We can take 15 minutes, I think, and then we'll reconvene for the afternoon, followed by lunch. So for our third session. So please stretch your legs and we'll reconvene in 15 minutes.
No, not yet.
But I mean, this.
Oh, yes.
Yes, are you
We have two cameras, YouTube and WebEx.
So you're being all around the world. Yeah. Did we look okay? I didn't look too flushed out. Or...
You need a touch up or you make up.
It wasn't actually on you. Oh no. Okay, good. I can see for the rest of the time you're gonna sit right.
The rerun will be tonight.
Perhaps we could get going again. So I'm Christopher Duchesne, Director General of Economic Development Policy at Canadian Federal Department of Indigenous Affairs. It is now called Indigenous Affairs, but it will be changing soon. There are, we used to have one federal minister, now we have two, and the department is being split in half. So my business card and my title will change, I would imagine, significantly in the next little while. And that change is quite interesting, and I'm bringing it up because I think it relates to what this session is going to be talking about. The Canadian government made a decision to make a division between the services provided to Indigenous Canadians, so more the operational side, what are the things that are pure services, and the other minister will be responsible for the relationship with Indigenous people and what the long-term future looks like from a rights perspective, from a self-government perspective, from a capacity development perspective, from an innovation perspective. So making the division between the day-to-day operational challenges and the longer term is actually an approach that was suggested in Canada in 1996. So it's taken 20 years for that recommendation to be put into action. So what this session is about is giving the opportunity to all of you, but focusing on the representatives from each country, to provide examples of where place-based economic development innovation has taken place. Where have there been projects that are sustainable, which have a regional impact, which are driven by or with the Indigenous communities, where there has been strong leadership from the Indigenous side, strong leadership from the political Indigenous and non-Indigenous side, strong leadership from the business community, etc. So what we would like to do is go country to country for you to give examples of where that has happened. And what this is building on, and it builds a lot on this morning's conversation, or what this is building towards, is us being able to collectively pull out the critical success factors, pull out the principles of what made for good regional economic development, so that when we are developing the framework and the methodology for the case studies that the OECD will be pursuing, that framework is built around the types of issues that you have brought up as having been successful in the past. So, Patrick, do you have the Americans? No.
Yes, sir.
Not yet. Can't make America great again if they're not on the line. So, so there are some questions that I would like everybody to keep in mind as you provide your examples of what made for innovative, successful regional development, economic development projects. I think also what this morning, it made me think, it's also important to keep in mind, what are the things that didn't work? So it may be a project that was very successful, or a business development that was very successful, but also if you have any comments on, it would have been even better if the following things had happened. We're interested to know about the things that didn't work as well. So short interventions about place-based innovation in economic development projects. So what role did local leaders and entrepreneurs play in the success of the project? What did governments do differently? So was there a different approach taken by government, either indigenous and non, to make it work? What role did the private sector play? Building on Don's example this morning of the RAPs, the Reconciliation Action Plans in Australia, did a private sector entity play a significant role, and did they do something differently? What lessons do we take from these initiatives? So what did we collectively learn that could then be mainstreamed? Can we take those learnings and use them over and over again so that they become part of the way we do business? That very much links to the framework we will develop to lead the case studies. And then the last part, which certainly in Canada is more and more prevalent, is in those projects, was there a way to evaluate success? Was something built into those projects so that not only did you know it was a success, but that you can prove it was a success? So what is the evaluation framework? What are the performance measures? What are the performance indicators? And how is it evaluated to know that it could be replicated? So initially we had thought that we would start with the Americans, but they may not be online. So I'll just open the floor to Canada, Colombia, Sweden, anybody who would like to give an example of place-based innovation.
Thank you, Chris. This is Jack Stevens.
Oh, so the Americans are online. Jack Stevens, thank you very much for joining us. We're just arranging the microphone to make sure that everybody can hear you.
Coming across?
Maybe we're just moving the speakerphone to be right below the microphone. That's the step. There we go. Go ahead. Thank you.
Does that sound?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. And when we're talking about place-based successes, I want to start with a grant program that we've operated since 2007. And the grants provide for feasibility studies conducted by universities and consultants and others chosen by the tribes who are the recipients of the grants. We believe that no project should be launched without first conducting a feasibility study. There are some people who believe that feasibility studies that recommend that projects not take place are failures, that they're a waste of money. In fact, we know that those are very important because they relieve the tribe of spending money on something that wasn't going to be fruitful. We also find that when feasibility studies recommend a project, that this becomes the gold standard for obtaining credit. Bankers and others look to feasibility studies conducted by third parties, objective third parties, as I say, the gold standard. And I can give you some examples of how feasibility studies have been successful over the years. The most famous in our program is the Iron Horse Industrial Park at Citizen Potawatomi tribe in southeastern Oklahoma. The tribe was adjacent to an orphan rail line. And they had the notion that they could move their cement batch plant products in a less costly manner by rail than on wheels. So they wanted to inquire about obtaining access to the rail line. So at a cost of just $40,000, a $40,000 grant resulted in a study done by Joe Colt at Harvard, who is an expert on Indian economic matters, but as it turns out, also an expert on rail lines. And the Colt study was used to benefit the tribe. They were able to leverage that study to obtain $3.5 million in financing. And I'm happy to report that there is at their industrial park now a rail connection, the first Indian-owned rail line in the United States, aptly named the Iron Horse Rail Line. And that's going to service a industrial park which is located in the center of the United States, near to the BNSF rail line, access to major ports, inland ports in the United States. And there are 4 countries now releases at that industrial park. And if you have any comments or questions about that project, feel free to break in, or I'll start to discuss some other examples.
Jack, first of all, it's for those of you around the table, it's Jack Stevens on the line, Director of the Office of Indian Energy and Economic Development from the U.S. Department of the Interior, from what is still called the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
True, Office of the Assistant Secretary, Indian Affairs.
Great.
U.S. Department of the Interior.
Excellent. So thanks for joining us. I certainly have one quick observation or question on so on the first part. And were you able to listen in to the discussion earlier that we were having?
I was not able, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, there were just some interesting things that came up repeatedly about successes that where there is obviously a big sense of ownership at the community level. There is a big tie between success and projects that are culturally relevant and meaningful. There was a tie between place-based and capacity development at the local level. So are there things related to the Iron Horse example that you just gave, which from an Indigenous perspective, were sort of the critical success factors of them leading there or getting endorsement?
Well, I think, the idea emanated from the tribe itself. So the tribe had made their own determination that it was culturally relevant. And, if I could show you a map, you would appreciate the geographical significance of the project, because the site is in the southeastern corner of Oklahoma, as I described, really in the center of the United States. And there'll be a transload facility there that will permit transfer of shipments from the train to trucks and direct access to the major rail networks of the United States, and it opens up an east-west connection to all the north-south rail corridors for regional commerce. So in terms of place-based development, there will be many things that come out of this to the benefit of the tribe, things that I can't even envision at this point.
And were there capacity development issues or opportunities as well? So is this a financial success as well as being sort of a greater community development success?
It's probably too early to say that it's a financial success because those leases have not been concluded yet. As I said, there are companies from 4 different countries looking at lease space at the industrial park.
Very interesting. Open the floor. Are there questions or comments? Tamara has a comment from the OECD.
Yeah, I guess my curiosity here is the role of government in facilitating or helping communities to conduct such assessments as you're speaking about. What is the role of the public sector?
Chris, I didn't hear that question entirely. Could you repeat it for me, please?
Tamara was wondering what the role of the public sector of government in facilitating the Indian Horse Project becoming a reality.
There would be 2 examples of government intervention. One, of course, is the grant. And these are competitive grants. We only have so many resources, so tribes were solicited to submit their proposals, and then we had a evaluation panel that selected top proposals and then obligated the funds. That was one intervention by the federal government. The second one, sort of interesting, and I should have mentioned it when I summarized the project, but they've also created a foreign trade zone. And those of you in the room will understand that a foreign trade zone creates an opportunity for a community to import and export and avoid tariff costs. And that way can achieve a market advantage in either manufacturing goods or assembling goods on site. So we expect that the designation of this site as a foreign trade zone will benefit the tribe in coming years.
That is fascinating, and I see Donna really frantically writing notes. She appeared yesterday in front of a parliamentary committee on the renegotiation of NAFTA. And obviously there's an Indigenous chapter in there, and certainly this example she may want to follow up with you as to what exactly what foreign trade zone means. But that's a purely Canadian thing. Interesting. Are there other questions or comments for John? I have one more. So you mentioned, you started off by talking about projects do not get funded or considered if the feasibility study has not been fully completed. Not wanting to fund failures. I'm sure we've all faced in our own governments and organizations economic development projects that were not sustainable and failed. Are there criteria attached to the feasibility study parameters that are beyond the business feasibility, or is it looking at feasibility as a means of community development? So is it looking at those feasibility studies and the parameters that they're done under look at something that is much broader than the economic feasibility?
You know, in the evaluation panel, the chief rating criteria is job creation. We also like to see whether the project can be replicated. This is in the interest of sharing the experience with other tribes. There are other tribes, for example, that have access to rail service that either have a whistle stop or have a location near a rail stop. And for example, if a freight storage and loading facility is successful at Potawatomi, why wouldn't it be successful at a rail stop at White Earth Nation in Minnesota, many other places in Indian country?
Very interesting. So the replicability and the job creation criteria are critical.
Exactly. And I have to say that we look at everything. We look at even at technologies that the tribe is seeking to test. We don't look at energy development because we have other grant programs that focus on energy development, but any sort of concept. I have to say that, and those of you probably have the same experience, that for whatever reason, these native communities attract promoters. And the promoters traffic in good ideas and they traffic in very poor ideas. And a tribal council, any group of governing persons in any community, I don't care where it is, whether it's a tribal or non-tribal community, are challenged when it comes to an arcane technology or a business idea that is unique. They realize very quickly that they're not equipped to determine the merits of such a proposal, but that there is somebody available by contract somewhere in the United States, probably in a university, who is an expert in that area. So we leave it to the tribe to select that expert and hire that expert, submit a budget, and that becomes part of their submission. There have been times when tribes have asked us to recommend experts, and again, we look to the tribe's judgment. So we'll look around and find several, and then leave it to their determination as to who they choose.
Interesting. And is enough funding supplied by your bureau to complete very detailed feasibility studies, or is there a reliance on some own source revenue being put in by the tribe?
I'm unfamiliar with any other program in the federal government that does what this feasibility study grant program does. I think it's one of a kind, and we always have more. We're oversubscribed every year. We always have more demand than we have resources. And I can tell you anecdotally that every time I visited a native community, I've always come back with several suggestions on feasibility studies. And I didn't complete my comment on promoters, but many promoters, unfortunately, are not honest. They may not be reputable. They may be honest, but have a poor understanding of the proposal that they're trafficking in. And these studies enable tribes to separate the goats from the sheep. Part of the study can consist of checking on the bona fides of the promoter.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Jack, and we hope that you can stay on the line to hear the examples from elsewhere, and that we can continue.
Happy to do that.
Great to rely on your support as we move forward. Very, very thought-provoking piece. So I'd like to turn to Don. Or Don? Okay. Don Madhavi, our Canadian delegate.
Definitely, I just want to add to that presentation, and thank you for that, Jack, because I'm really interested to learn more about these foreign trade zones. I think that's something that's of interest to many Indigenous groups, I think, around the world. And maybe there's something that we can learn there, so if we can send a contact, that would be great. Today I'm going to maybe share with you something that I'm familiar with in my area, is some of the projects. And then first I'll tell you how we get into these projects. So almost 30 years ago, the First Nations in our region came together to establish an organization called the Wendake Business Development Corporation. That's where I work every day. I've been with the organization since it started almost 30 years ago. The fact is, it was the community leadership came together and said, we need to do something to develop our own economies in our own terms. So they developed this entity, and it took a lot of time and planning and to get this started. And once they did, our primary service has always been providing business financing and business advisory services to our own people. But there's another side to our organization that deals with economic development. And on that economic development side, our community leadership again has come together to advise us to look into certain sectors that they feel are important in our area. It's not something that we as an organization come up with ourselves, it's the community leadership that tells us we need to work on these areas. So over the years, we've developed 3 comprehensive regional economic strategies. The first one has been tourism, the second one was fisheries, and the third one was mining and mineral development. So I'm going to share the story about our tourism and how that started. Our organization meets with our community leaders, and we work with 27 First Nations in our area. So there's an Indigenous population in the region of just over 50,000. And our leaders came together and started talking about tourism. And we usually bring in different presenters on different economic sectors to discuss and to look at and to see what do we want to make a priority. So we made, it was the leaders who said that we're tired of these tour buses driving through our communities. They don't stop. There's people on them, and you can see the big tour company names on the side of these big motor coaches driving through our communities. And we have no idea what tour guides are saying on those buses about us. We have no indication whatsoever. And they just did not like that we had people coming in and some people would drive in on their own and into our communities and look around, but we honestly didn't know what brought them there, or most of them didn't spend any money there. So it was something that bothered us, and seeing those tour buses go through. So the community leaders said at that time that let's look at this industry. Let's figure this industry out. And they had they said, let's do a strategy. Let's figure this out. So we did a strategy on the tourism industry for our region. And we looked at the market potential. We had a really good person working with us, an expert in the industry. And what we did is we took the economic development officers from each of the First Nations, and I always remember this, and we drove around to the communities from the point of view of a visitor. What do you see when you drive into our communities or come by boat into our communities? What do you see? And we never realized how much we had. We have these little tucked away craft shops. We have these beautiful beaches and natural vistas that people could see. We thought that maybe the industry was only interested in those old brick buildings that you see and things like that, but people are interested in nature, and they're interested in learning about who we are and how we've survived for so long. So we did a strategy, and we decided to come up with our own entity that would look after tourism. And so no more tour buses could come onto the community without first checking in and without first having one of our own step-on guides hop on that bus and teach about who we are. We said that what we had an opportunity to do here was share the beauty of our culture. Because sometimes when people will come, they'll see the poverty in our communities, and they don't understand where that comes from. They don't understand our culture at all. So we had this opportunity. We opened the door to teach people about who we were on our terms. But the first thing that we did is we brought the elders together, and we said, if we're going to embark on this, we need to consult with the elders. And this was all part of the strategy. And the elders talked about how we should be very careful if we're going to get into tourism, because we don't want it to impact our land and resources. We don't want to be exploited. We've always felt exploited. We weren't involved in that circle. And so they developed what we call cultural integrity guidelines. Those guidelines help to say what we couldn't do. We weren't going to share ceremonies, except for maybe a sunrise ceremony to welcome the day with our visitors and to teach them about that, and to maybe provide them teachings with how to honor the water, the earth, the air, the fire, and what that meant to us, the sacred fire. To give them teachings. But we wouldn't be putting on ceremonies like sweat lodges, or people always want healing ceremonies. You know, we would get phone calls for these kinds of ceremonies. We said, no, that's not tourism. This is who we are. So that's protected. We didn't sell medicines. That was part of our cultural integrity guidelines as well. There's a lot of, it's a very simple guideline, but it was what the elders left with us, and we've honored that. So that was developed back in 1997, and we followed that since. So we went around to the communities and we took inventory of what we had and what we could do, and we did some tour guide training. We had some very small businesses at that time and campgrounds. But what we did was we started to get the people involved in marketing, and we started marketing the region, not just our communities, but the whole region. And we have today what is called the Great Spirit Circle Trail, and you can look it up on oh, there you go. Yeah, the Great Spirit Circle Trail. So we said that we were going to teach people things like how to make bread, bannock over an open fire. There was canoe packages. So we developed packages that we were comfortable in sharing, and we had to market those. And went to the world's largest tourism trade show in Berlin, Germany, and we developed partnerships with companies from around the world to bring visitors to see us. So we have partners in Germany and the UK and Italy, mostly European countries, because when we did our research, that's where the interest mostly came from, is from Europe, for our type of tourism that we're offering. And this really helped to provide jobs for our youth, and even for our traditional people, so that they could sit in a circle. We have a roundhouse in one of our communities where they could learn some valuable teachings that are just about principles and how we should live and how we should look after the earth. And it's sharing common sense things. So we I can tell you that through that initiative, we've made friends from around the world. And the world has visited us. We still see people who For example, they have the small motor coaches that people come and rent. They always have a Great Spirit Circle Trail brochure in them. But since then, the First Nations have come together and developed small eco-lodges, resorts, and together they invested in a hotel conference center, same size as the one that we're sitting in today. And that, I can tell you, has brought a lot of but tourism dollars to our region, probably in excess of 30 million a year in tourism dollars, in addition to what was already being brought in before, because in our area, tourism was the largest industry on the little place called Manitoulin Island. So, but I'm talking about all of Northeast Ontario, where we do have the